mercy. Seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain. And when he sat down, his disciples came to him. And he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Jesus Christ came and established an everlasting kingdom, a kingdom that is in effect and is already and not yet. It's a kingdom that runs counter to all earthly kingdoms and is a kingdom that subverts all of our expectations and understandings of what a kingdom, and certainly the kingdom, ought to be and be like. And yet, this kingdom is populated by us. We who, having grasped just the edge of all God has in store, still struggle mightily to understand all of its wonderful and terrible implications. We as Christians know that Jesus has come and he has done this. He has saved us, he's liberated, he's redeemed, and we are left with the question, just how ought such a citizen of that kingdom live and think and be? There is perhaps no greater piece of literature in history than this, the Sermon on the Mount, a moment in time when Jesus took the care to redefine what kingdom life actually looks like, to reshape what it means to actually be a part of this kingdom and what it means to walk in step with His Spirit and to live a life that testifies to the reality of the already and not yet kingdom that is very much in effect. I'm going to suggest to you that the way we tend to see this Sermon on the Mount, though, and especially these Beatitudes, can actually be backwards. Yeah, of course, the sermon is designed to show us how Jesus would like us to be in the world, and that we would be salt and light, that our default attitude and disposition ought to be to run into and not away from situations that would otherwise fall apart and bind them together, that we would preserve and protect like the salt that he was referencing, and that we would bring a little light through our good deeds into dark places. It's also designed to show us how we ought to live among our neighbors. Now, coming later in the sermon, you'll hear this through a run of "you have heard it said" teachings. But of course, it all begins with these Beatitudes, and here's where the subversion actually kicks in, right from the jump. Because the way we traditionally read them, we're incredibly prone to looking at this and saying, now, if I want to be a Christian, I need to start being poor in spirit. But I guess I also need to mourn. I need to be meek. I need to hunger and thirst for righteousness. Okay, I'm back on board. I guess I can try to be a Christian then. I can try to follow Jesus. Then hopefully when all is said and done, I will have done well enough to get in. Sound familiar? Close to home? But what if Jesus was pointing at a deeper reality? What if these Beatitudes are not a list of spiritual chores for us to attend to? What if they aren't our check boxes to pursue, hoping to attain the kingdom in the end? What if instead they are evidence of a present citizenship in that kingdom? Sometimes I think it would do us well to read them backwards. The reason I used the word terrible earlier is because if you truly read this sermon and these Beatitudes in that way, the way that says, hey, here's a list of things you must do and do perfectly to enter the kingdom, you cannot come away from it feeling like anything more than a terrible person who could never live up to that standard. I mean, that's the honest reading, and in a way, it holds a modicum of truth. When we read the Beatitudes and the rest of the sermon, you know that it's a picture of how you want the people around you to live life. In fact, you've demanded it from them. But at the same time, it becomes so clear by showing our motives truly that you realize that you fall infinitely short of it yourself, and that we can't even come close to what we have demanded of others. And in no place is this more evident than in verse 7, where Jesus says to us, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy." Yeah, we desperately want mercy. We need mercy as Christians. We've received mercy, but how have we done at extending it? So let's flip the script. These Beatitudes do describe in some ways how we should live, but they don't mainly just describe how we should live. To be merciful is an action. To be a peacemaker can involve action, but we can't miss this, especially when it comes to mercy. The Beatitudes don't describe different kinds of people or groups. They describe what a Christian actually is. And it's saying that before you can live the way the rest of this sermon will demand you to live, you must be a certain kind of person already. You've got to have a way of thinking. You've got to be before you can do. And in order to be, we have to have been made into something new. So hang with me for just a few moments. You're either a Christian or in the process of becoming a Christian if you're actually poor in spirit, because pretty much nobody else is. That's where it begins for us. It doesn't say poor economically, it says poor in spirit. It's not talking about economic poverty, it's talking about spiritual poverty as a condition, spiritually bankrupt. Everyone in the world besides Christians, in the presence of God, would try to say, I've done good things, wouldn't they? Wouldn't you if you had to give account and you didn't have Jesus? The point is that most people believe they have some money in the bank spiritually. I'm not perfect, but I've done some good and I just need forgiveness for the debts that I have and the mistakes that I've made. I've actually done some really good things too. But Christians have realized that we have nothing in the bank spiritually. We're the only ones who say, I have nothing of merit to offer on my own. My righteousness is filthy rags. I have nothing to begin to pay these debts with. It's not just that I sin, but even the good things I've done have been done to try and save myself and put God in my debt and earn my way. To be poor in spirit is to know and admit that I have nothing to offer God. And only a Christian can say this. Are you poor in spirit? So we also mourn in spirit and we repent for it, and that makes us meek. We recognize that we're without any power and that we're completely dependent. And lots of people come to God for a little help, but they aren't poor in spirit. Only a Christian knows they have to rely completely on God's forgiveness and mercy. Mercy. There's that word again. Absolute grace. A Christian hungers and thirsts for righteousness, love, justice, integrity, peace. Most people who read this sermon find it unrealistic and they're repelled by it. But if you're poor in spirit, you'll look at it and you'll say, I know this is the way it's supposed to be. And you'll want it. You'll desire it. The Beatitudes, see, are describing a type of person. And if we haven't become or aren't becoming this kind of person, we won't be able to live the kind of life that's described in the sermon to follow. It'll just crush us under its expectation. Finally, we come to mercy, and I unpack this way because it is the case that unless we see the Beatitudes for what they are, unless we see ourselves for what we are, unless we see Jesus for who he is, we will never get mercy, even though God has freely given it. See, Jesus is saying, as with all the Beatitudes before, that we are not going to give mercy until we understand just how much we wholly depend on it. This list of attributes build upon one another in such a beautiful way. Consider that if you hunger and thirst for righteousness and you are poor in spirit, you look upon the kind of life that God calls you to live and you earnestly desire it. You must have it. You know you ought to be and you better be, and yet you aren't. And as you mourn and repent for how woefully short you fall, there is such mercy that is extended to you that you can barely understand it. It makes you emotional. And when you move into the world and encounter incredibly broken places and people who aren't living up to their own standards or your standards, you're moved only by the conviction to extend to them what has been extended to you. Mercy. This is a true saying. You can only ever extend the amount of grace which you have realized you depend on. In fact, mercy is the evidence that you have begun to grasp that grace at all. A quote that I read says this: we think we can be neutral, not merciful, but not unmerciful. But to be not merciful is to be merciless. And this begs some introspection. Have we up till now read these Beatitudes as a list of things to do in order to gain the favor of God? Or have you allowed the grace and mercy of God to sink in and actually change the kind of person you're becoming? Has the reality of the gospel revealed to you how poor in spirit you are? Has that led you to mourn? Are you fully dependent, or are you still trying to be good enough? Do you hunger and thirst for righteousness or for recognition? Has mercy moved you to be merciful? Look at your life and the way you think about others, the way you speak with and about others. Look at your social media. Look at all the blocked friends. Look at all who have fallen short in your eyes, and ask whether you have held them to the standard that they and you ought to have lived up to, or to the kind of grace and mercy that has been freely given to you.